Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the March 15 meeting of the City of Oneonta Planning Commission. Clerk, could you please call roll?
Chair Lott.
Here.
Vice Chair Marino.
Here.
Commissioner Massey. Commissioner Baskin.
Here.
Commissioner Picardo. Commissioner Tucci. Commissioner Torino.
Here.
Councilmember Risberger.
Here.
You have a
Okay, thank you. Is there any correspondence?
quorum. No.
Okay, so has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the February meeting? Does anybody, I guess I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes presented.
Approve the minutes.
Motion made by Commissioner Tamayo, seconded by Vice Chair Marino. Any further discussion or corrections? Okay, hearing none, I guess we could just do the
Acclamation.
acclamation. Is there, like I said, vote by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes approved. Okay, so new business. The first item on our agenda is the Planning Commission review of the area variance application for 189 Main Street. So I think it would benefit the commission for, Steve, if you wouldn't mind just giving a description of how this came to your office, how it applies to the new MU1 code, and then kind of why your office, deemed it, necessary to obtain a variance, and then kind of what our role is.
So, the new MU1 code that was put in place last January requires that any area or use variance in the downtown is also reviewed by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission provides an opinion to the zoning board, or basically a determination, not on the application or the merits of the application, but how the application could impact the overall zoning and planning scheme, or strategy of the downtown. So, for example, with this application, if an area variance is granted, inherently there are criteria that have to be met in order for an area variance to be given. One of those would be it doesn't negatively impact the existing community. And unlike a use variance, area variances don't necessarily have to meet all the criteria. It's a true balancing act of, is this overly negative? Is this positive? Is this something that's as simple as a setback? Or is it something big, like an additional story on a building? So when the zoning board looks at those things, they're weighing the positives, the negatives, the overall kind of impact of the zone to grant that variance. So when you grant an area variance, let's say like for this sign, one of the things in the application is the applicant has said that it's in character with or harmonious with the existing downtown. So if the zoning board were to make that determination, then the planning board would be required to come back and say, well, maybe we have to review the zoning. Because if our zoning code says these types of signs are not they're not permitted in the downtown, but our zoning board says, well, technically they're harmonious or in accordance with the existing downtown, then we have to maybe review our sign code and say, okay, well, maybe part of this is updating our sign code again. So the purpose of this is basically so that the Planning Commission and the zoning board communicate on variance applications, so that the Planning Commission and the zoning board each know what the other is thinking about. One of the criticisms in the past has been that our zoning board and our Planning Commission don't communicate. So the easiest way to do that was to require them to communicate on these types of applications. So the purpose of this isn't for you guys to grant or deny, or it's to simply look at the application and say, if this is approved, this could be the long-term impact to the zoning code. If it's denied, this is why. Like a denial of this application means blank. It's basically to provide kind of two narratives as to like how this variance application could impact the long-term zoning strategy of the city. That's the purpose of this. It's basically to make sure that our zoning and planning boards, like, we're not coming up with zoning ordinance here that don't meet what we're seeing actually in reality or are in direct conflict with what our zoning board is approving or denying. So like, let's say on the flip side of this, someone comes in with a really great sign and the zoning board denies it. Well, then we kind of come back and say, oh, well, maybe a sign that's 2 feet bigger and shaped like a turtle isn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe our zoning code needs to be updated. Like, there's all kinds of like tweaks that you can do within the zoning code. And the purpose of this is to make sure that we're actively tweaking when we need to, instead of waiting 5 or 6 years out and then rezoning.
Let my dogs out and change, and now they can.
And then traditionally, under the former code, outside of MU1, the ZBA had authority to approve site plan applications without consulting the planning commission. So this changes it, enforces, the two commissions to communicate with one another to ensure that the intent of the zoning code is being met, and that variances that are issued are, based off of a strong record and robust kind of review.
Or the opposite side of that is so that we're not sitting here saying, this should be prohibited, and we get 12 applications a month that are requests for exactly that thing.
And it allows us to treat the zoning document as a living, as you say, exactly.
Yeah. So a great example has been short-term rental. We get a lot of short-term rental applications. Well, what we found out is that in some of the zones we didn't allow it, a small tweak to the zoning code resulted in a ton less variance applications. So part of this is to try to help keep the zoning code, I guess, agile, a little more nimble, instead of kind of blunt, hitting everything with a hammer. We kind of look at it and say, well, maybe not everything's a nail, Maybe there's kind of gray areas that we can tweak as we go, instead of waiting until we've had 14 zoning variance applications and going, something's not going right here.
So Stephen, since this is new to us as well, coming like since the first night, and we were chit-chatting a little bit before the meeting started, so if you could just reiterate too that, because, the applicant's not here. So in the past, when we've had something come, and I don't think it's changed, when something's come forward to the planning commission, the applicant's notified, whether it's, like a letter, usually an applicant. So you said that the applicant doesn't have to be here, but then how can they explain to us what they're doing if we can't ask them questions? So was the applicant notified about the meeting, and has the standard changed on how applicants are notified?
In this case, like, the planning commission isn't approving or denying an application. So like, you could say, we didn't have enough information to really review this application, and there'll be a chance next month for the applicant to come in. I mean, this application isn't gonna go in front of the zoning board until the end of April, I guess. So there's another planning commission meeting before,
Okay,
that applicant could attend. And you could say, well, yeah, we got this application, we have questions about it, for us to make any sort of review to provide to the zoning board. I mean,
I think it's hard to make a determination without listening to any applicant, they can always give us a little bit more detail. I understand you're saying we can make we're not making like a yes, no vote, we're just giving like recommendations, I'm assuming, to the zoning. But, if we had a question, then how are we supposed to get to, we can't really ask him if he's not here, or even the property owner. I mean, there's nobody here to ask besides you.
right.
And then and sometimes when you read something, sometimes it sounds great, sometimes it doesn't, there's questions. That's all I'm asking, you had mentioned that he doesn't have to be here, the applicant doesn't have to be here, and I just didn't know if everybody else was comfortable with that or not.
I mean, I think that, Commissioner Tamino, your point is well taken. But I do think there's, plenty of kind of facts related to this variance application that we can discuss, absent, his other materials, and then we can obviously, I think I would be more comfortable having the applicant come to the next meeting. But there's certain kind of standards related to area variances that I wanted to discuss with the group. And then, particularly related to area variances, and then also, I wanted to kind of, discuss kind of how the genesis of this, why we required the variance, and why, how this came about, and kind of when, the sign was installed and whatnot, because I think that kind of issue, those are things that already have happened. So that thing, we should, use this opportunity to discuss this as a group, and be mindful of kind of the thing, discussion items and questions going into the next meeting. So I don't think that it'd be right or pertinent to prepare, any sort of written finding of fact now, but I think it'd be worth discussing it, at least among us, because this is the first time, we can't discuss it outside of regular business, so we have to do it during these meetings, so I think we should, at least use the opportunity. Did you have, any?
Yeah, Jim Tomano, I'm the chair of the zoning board, like you know, Danny, so I'm here to show that the planning commission and the zoning board have a solid connection. I'm here this evening to listen, and I was new to this, understanding this whole new format. I guess this provision was put into place, you said last year, so I think this is the first one that's
This is our
coming.
first one.
This is the first one coming
Ever.
before us. So at the zoning board, everybody knows that we grant the variance, and from my understanding, and I'm just learning about this, we will take the opinion of the planning commission, but it weighs the same as any other opinion. So that's basically what it comes down to in my mind. So whatever recommendation comes from this body will be brought to the zoning board, and it will be like, yes, we think this is a great project, no, we don't think this is a great project, or we have no comment on it whatsoever. And then the zoning board would look at it and say, okay, this is the direction in which the planning commission thinks that this particular project should go. And then we would take that into consideration, just like we would, from anyone else outside the community, or in the community, but outside, this body. So that's the way that I see this. I don't know, we still have to, adjudicate this and look at it from a, zoning board perspective, listen to all the arguments, put all those things into play, and then go from there. So this is something new from us, as far as like trying to figure out how this all goes. So I just wanted to come here tonight. I'm not wasting my Wednesday here. I'm here to listen and to, see how this all, plays out.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm glad this is starting over a new leaf between the planning commission and zoning board.
Sure.
Rest assured that we will, planning commission will be present at the April ZBA meeting when this is discussed. And I think it's great, you phrased kind of responsibilities of the ZBA perfectly. You guys are the appellate body and you have to look at the project record as it's presented to you. And our the planning commission's entry is just one more piece of that record. So I think, for area variances, as Stephen has mentioned, I kind of did want to touch on, why, this is, variance was required, specifically because, the physical aspect of the sign and the LED components expressly prohibited in the MU1 zone. Now, the issue with area variances, in addition to the balancing act, is that the planning commission must grant the minimum variance necessary.
The zoning board.
The zoning board, sorry. Zoning board must grant the minimum variance necessary, and it becomes kind of challenging to do so when the sign has already been erected. So the first question that I would have is, when was the sign installed? And was it installed after the MU1's code was finished?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to interject. So, my father has he's passed on, a restaurant since 1972 on Main Street. And ever since I've been on Main Street in that restaurant, I've seen that sign. Maybe it's not specific, maybe it's not exactly like it was in the 70s or in the 80s and the 90s, but that sign has been there on that building for many years.
Yep.
Now, to me, because, I'm not into that architecturalness, sizes and stuff. So to me, it doesn't really look like it's changed that much. I mean, I think that technology is changing and evolving, and LED lights are the things, are the new, we do them in our house, and we have our new projects. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's not gaudy to me. I think it's done very tastefully. I mean, I think it looks good to me. It's been there for a lot of years. I mean, maybe it's changed as far as like the new format, but I mean, ever since I was a young girl.
There's
It's
existing
been-
there's existing sign hardware there.
Yeah.
Using that logic, anyone could then install a digital sign over an existing sign board and say it's an existing sign. Because the Latte Lounge could change their sign to an LED sign and mount it in the existing location and say it's not a new sign, the Latte Lounge sign's been there
But
since.
hasn't that sign's always been lit? I mean, like, maybe the screen's different and stuff. Go
That's
ahead,
the
Dave.
key.
So
But
yeah.
it's not like you're not like taking like a matte sign and saying, I'm gonna put like lights and make it flash. I mean, it's,
So I think.
that's where I'm confused.
Sure.
Go ahead, Dave.
So, I mean, so I think, hold on, David, I just want to make one point. The issue before us is the fact that the physical aspect of the sign being LED is expressly not allowed. It wasn't allowed in 2013 and it wasn't allowed now. And the issue before us is that the dimensions of the LED sign, the physical aspect of the sign was enlarged dramatically. So under our code, as I understand it, that would fall under the expansion of the non-conforming use, which is also not allowed. Or non,
It requires a permit.
requires a sign permit.
Once you require a sign permit, then you have to meet the new zoning code.
And then it triggers, exactly, so, and in which it doesn't meet the sign permit requirements because it's not allowed, hence it needs, requires an area variance and the balancing act therein. So I just wanted to touch on, the kind of criteria that we have to look at before getting to Councilman Risberger's question is there are 5 factors that we have to consider as a group for an area variance. One is whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties that will be created by the granting of the area variance. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. Whether the requested area variance is substantial. Whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision by the ZBA, but not necessarily preclude the granting of an area variance. Sorry, Councilman Risberger, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. There's a lot here. I guess the first thing I want to start with is we changed the MU1 code. We passed this last year, and Councilman Carson was an affirmative vote on this. He was part of that decision, part of the council that developed it. So he knew what was in it. I mean, I'm extremely disappointed by this entire game that's been played here, because what ended up happening, obviously, is, and it doesn't matter whether we like LED signs or not. I mean, personally, I have nothing against LED signs, but I helped pass that MU1 zone because there's a certain look we're looking for on our main street. And we don't have lots of LED signs on our main street at all. In fact, we have one, and it's this one. And what happened was he took the existing sign, and the size of it's the same, but the digital portion of it is at least twice the size. At least twice the size. And so Councilman Carson knew what he was doing was taking a sign that was a non-conforming use and made it more non-conforming, which was against the code that he helped pass. And rather than go and apply for a permit to get this through the ZBA, well, through the Planning Commission, then ZBA, really it would go to ZBA. Rather than do that, he took it upon himself to install it anyway. And he was told by our city attorney, he was told by code over and over again that this was not the same sign, and told him what he was required to do, and he refused to do it.
See, this is why I wish he was here, because I think he,
These are facts. I mean,
yeah, but I don't know that, and how would I be privy to that?
So I
I
mean,
mean, you know that because you're on the.
so I mean, this is something that, for me, this is a very black and white issue. And it's we can't go back, and so like what Stephen said, if a variance is given, it means that the sign is harmonious with the rest of downtown Main Street. I don't see any other LED sign downtown
There's one by Foothills.
off of Main Street.
Off Main Street, yeah.
Right. And did that go through?
that was given an area variance.
Area
Yeah, that, right. But that's not on our Main Street either.
What's the, where does it start, where does it end, what's involved? Because like Main Street, I mean, it doesn't say, is it just, is it says Main Street, or is it downtown, or is it, you know, like,
I think,
where does it start to,
I think we would define it as the MU1 zone. I think the other issue that we need to get to, which you're kind of, I think you're kind of hinting at, Commissioner Tamino, is that the application in front of us is the wrong one,
yeah.
and they're not the required supporting documents submitted, which kind of really eliminates our ability to rigorously debate this, even, you know, from, you know, a basic kind of statement of facts. I think the main issue that I see is that, you know, the precedent that we set, you know, the ZBA cannot ignore prior decisions unless there's a specific set of circumstances that kind of dictate otherwise, and we've been through this with the, you know, Hawk Hill Solar project. I think the issue, the concern that I have personally is the kind of build first and ask for permission later. It's a very irregular process. It contravenes the purpose of zoning. The purpose of zoning is to have an orderly approach to development. And I think, you know, that when the applicant is here next month, we would reiterate the whole process and allow him to, the applicant to present, you know, the facts, but then kind of where I'm coming from is that, you know, among the criteria, the balancing act is inherently already skewed completely the other direction. Because we can't, the planning commission or this, you know, it'd be hard for the planning commission to recommend a minimum variance when the sign's already there. We can't say, you know, you may, you know, increase the, you know, area of the sign by 2 inches or something like that, or 2 feet or whatever. You know, now it's already there, so that kind of is gone. But the other piece, you know, that we have to be conscious of is that the intent and purpose of the MU1 code, and MU1 code places an incredibly strong emphasis on historic preservation. And so in my mind, historic preservation means kind of preserving the historic development pattern, and we recognize the presence of non-conforming uses, but we also want to get away from someone saying that if they disagree with the code, they can just build, and then come and say, hey, we need a variance for this. We've already invested thousands of dollars in the property, and now, you know, we're asking.
That's a self-created hardship.
Yes,
Right.
and so unlike a use variance, the presence of a self-created difficulty does not, you know, inherently preclude granting the area variance. It just makes it harder, but it also makes the you know, the cities or planning commission's job to recommend, you know, a minimum variance much harder. It gives us basically either we say take down the sign and replace it with something smaller, or it gives us, or we just say let it go, you know, let the sign stay as is. That's kind of the course that I see. And
I was just gonna ask, you said that the application is incorrect. Can you explain what application we should actually be looking at?
sure. So under in the packet that we have, part 2 says area variance. And that's what we'd be asking the applicant to submit to us ahead of next month's meeting, so that we may, you know, prepare ourselves to have
So
a.
site plan drawings.
Correct, so we'd wanna see the dimensions, we wanna see when he installed the sign, we'd wanna see the dimensions of the pre-existing sign. We would wanna make like a accurate statement as to the degree to which the sign grew. Although, you know, if you had to submit a sign application to code would request essentially the same thing, and then would have the authority to approve or deny the sign permit, and then
We have a
refer to
denied
it.
sign permit.
So he denied the sign permit application, and then referred it to us. So I think like what we have in front of us is, you know, is basically the wrong application. You know, it also doesn't answer, you know, the criteria, for variance, for the criteria for area variances, essentially. It doesn't answer any of those, but, that said, we can talk about it briefly, but if the commission feels more comfortable waiting until the applicant's here, we can kind of do that. Which I think is completely fine as well.
Yeah, because I don't really, I understand what you're saying, but then I'm wondering, like, do we need all that stuff? Because we're just making a recommendation to the zoning. So do we need to go through all those things that he's talking, because we're just making a recommendation, yes, no, maybe, we're indifferent.
So part of this process is not just reviewing Lynn's application, it's saying we got an area variance for a digital sign. In the planning commission's opinion, who were involved in writing the zoning code for this zone, does this have a negative, neutral, positive impact on future planning processes downtown? And if this application is approved, is this something that we go back and say, if this is a harmonious sign in the zone, do we review the zoning code and say, okay, well, maybe we need to update our restrictions on lit signage? Maybe if it's denied, we say, okay, well, maybe we need to more strongly words a portion of the zoning code to prevent any confusion in the future about how LED signage is being regulated. That's the purpose of this. It's not necessarily to review individual applications
So then we
or
don't really need to ask him.
nitpicking.
Right?
Part of the idea is you're reviewing this, you can review the application, but part of that application review is what is the overall impact of the larger zone, not just specifically what is the impact of Lynn Carson's specific sign.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of where I was going is I wanted to say, you know, here's what his sign is,
Right.
here's how it happened, here's the degree, you know, how the nonconformity was increased, you know, so I wanted to have a clear statement of like commonly understood facts before kind of saying, you know, our opinion. So that way, you know, it can't be argued that the planning commission is inherently biased or is trying to, I don't know, you know, adversely impact business owners by arbitrarily deciding that this is out of character. Right?
And honestly, and I'm gonna throw out the boogeyman of the lawsuit, like, in the end, it's better to have the application correctly filed for the zoning board, because when the zoning board reviews this, they're going to be reviewing an application that should be pretty accurate.
So we would want the ZBA to have a, you know, robust record to look at it, and in the event that the applicant has a wrong application submitted, they're just gonna be told to come back with the right one in May or something, you know, in theory, if you just let it go. But you know, I think, you know, if the law of some deeds taught us anything, you know, it's to be careful with how we, you know, proceed. But I think you know, Steve, your point's well taken in that, it's important to kind of think about how this broadly affects the zone. So basically, I look at it in kind of three buckets. One is process. Was the MU1 process followed correctly? And what does this say if, you know, how the planning commission and ZBA jointly reviewed this and moved it forward through their respective processes? What does it mean for future applicants and future applications? Two, you know, whether or not, you know, the sign, you know, Steve said that whether or not the sign code needs to be changed. And kind of three, you know, how do we define, you know, adverse impact to downtown and MU1 more specifically from the built environment and natural environment? What are the criteria that we would be looking at, and how do we consider that? Because in future, if other sign applications come, we'll be asked to kind of apply these same, you know, standards for area variances, you know, over time, and having a good, you know, record will allow us to, you know, say I term out and say someone else takes over, you know, or say like Vice Chair Marino takes over his chair or somebody else does, they'll be able to kind of see, you know, the genesis of our decisions and kind of, you know, be able to refer to different things, and it'll help future planning commissions understand the intent of or interpret the intent of the MU1 code that Steve prepared and the city council voted on.
If I could just, a couple things, at the zoning board, we never set precedent there. That's not something that we do. It was stated here a few minutes ago. Like, we don't set precedent. Each property has distinct, unique circumstances. So each time we look at a particular property or a project, it's for that property at that time. So that's important to recognize too. Also with this process, I think it's getting dangerous in some respects if you're gonna sit here as a planning commission and go through the entire process of approving or disapproving an application on whether it met the merits of the zoning board of appeals application. It's very dangerous, because if it comes to our board and you said yes to it and we say no, or vice versa, I think it's kind of interesting what's gonna happen here.
I disagree with you on that. I think it's our job to take a look at what somebody's looking to do and whether a permit would be issued or not. And if we don't, or a permit is not issued because it's not part of the, in this case, not following that MU1 process, it's going to go to the zoning board anyway. But you're right, if we say no and you say yes, that's a problem. Or vice versa, if we say yes and you say no, it's a problem. I
We
see
approve the variances or disallow them.
I think.
Yeah,
And I think it's a dangerous process right now that this is gonna be tried twice.
I disagree
I
that it'll be
disagree.
tried.
Okay,
It-
well, I'm the chair of the zoning, you're chair of the planning, and you're a council person, and I think we need to figure this out. That's why I'm here
I think
tonight, to understand this.
My perspective and how the code is clearly written is that the planning board submits a comment to the ZBA just like any other person would. And as we saw with the Hawk Hill Solar project that did require a variance, we submitted a recommendation, we asked for an interpretation of the zoning code. Similarly, and we gave our interpretation to Chair May, that was completely fine. So that's there was precedent for this kind of type of interaction elsewhere in the city. So I think, the planning commission has no authority to approve, say yes or say no. We have the authority, however, to kind of review projects, comment on them, and analyze them and offer, for site plan, we can approve or deny. But for this specific thing, we have no authority to do so. So I just want to make it very clear that we have no authority to approve or disapprove a variance. What we do have the authority to do under this code, and we're tasked with doing, is providing a comment to the zoning board of appeals based on our findings of fact. It's basically adding to the record and helping and communicating with one another and saying what we think. And then as chair of the ZBA, you can say, this makes absolutely no sense. I completely disagree, and just throw it in the garbage, if you wanted to. Because that's your, as the appellate body, that's your charge. So I think, it's good that we're having this discussion. I don't think that really there's any kind of danger, because there's gonna be an opportunity for the applicant to discuss things. We're gonna submit a written statement of fact that's non-binding, and not necessarily, entirely, I guess, required to be even thoroughly considered by the ZBA. It just goes into the ZBA file and we say we did it, and then you guys can choose how you want to proceed with that, correct, Steve?
Correct. So it would basically just be a public comment
Essentially.
about the application, just like I could file as just Joe Blow off the street. I could write a correspondence to ZBA outlining exactly why this should or should not be approved, just like anyone else. The exception to that is, however an application for a variance plays out with the ZBA, following that approval or denial, the planning commission would then review the ZBA's determination and then review the zoning. So instead of being like, let's wait until we get 14 applications for signs and then 5 years later we'll change the zoning code to reflect that. If the ZBA makes a determination that's, that X equals Y, and that makes sense and it's harmonious and it's the intent of the zone, or it makes sense in the zone, then the planning commission subsequently would review the zoning code and say, based on the ZBA's determination, based on these applications in front of us, we discuss maybe updating the sign code or whatever. It's not even signs, it could be any code.
And inherently, I could, as chair of the planning commission, I could attend any ZBA meeting and essentially say the same things about the variance application before you as it is, So for example, for certain, I think I came to maybe one short-term rental discussion and I had, comments to that effect, whether or not it met the same criteria as, representing the planning commission, that, that's kind of how it would happen, but this would give us a written paper trail of correspondence that would ideally help us make changes to the code to avoid, overly onerous regulations or tweak our processes to make things easier for folks in the community. Because none such, formalized process existed, much to the frustration of the ZBA and the planning commission. So that's kind of where we are. But I do think, I don't think we've heard from Commissioner Baskin at all. Just wanted to hear you, see if you had anything to suggest, or share.
So we, I guess, or the ZBA, if they were to approve or deny this, you said it doesn't set any precedents? You don't set any precedents?
No, each property has unique circumstances and we look at that each time.
So I guess I'm kind of confused, like what we were talking about, like this could set a precedent for the ME1 district, is that what we were saying? I'm
So-
kind of confused.
What I was saying is that court, you know, and the chair may, and I have fought over this many times, but the courts have ruled, you know, definitively that ZBAs cannot ignore prior decisions for a similar type of project, absent specific circumstances, you know, specific to the site. So, you know, in the event that, you know, several variance applications go before the ZBA for signs, LED signs in particular, you know, they would have to describe which circumstances of the project are different, but they can't ignore the prior decisions entirely. That's kind of what I'm saying. So like, for example, if we get 10 sign requests for the area variance for the LED signs, you know, and for different parcels, you would, the ZBA, you know, in theory would consider the individual specific characteristics of that project, but they couldn't ignore how they treated the other 9 applications.
Yeah, I don't know if our concern is this is a slippery slope, saying if they approve this LED sign and LED signs all across Main Street we put up.
No, it would, I think it would be like, if we approve, you know, if hypothetically this is approved with next to no review, it would be harder to require future applicants to submit detailed documents because they could say that they're being discriminated against, or, you know, the decisions are to require them to do it is arbitrary, so that's
Well,
kind of what I'm saying.
So you're saying based on the process that was followed in this application?
Yeah, and then it would also
Future
be,
applications.
it would also be the specifics regarding the review. So if, for example, if an LED sign was expanded and then the ZBA or the plan, you know, I guess I shouldn't speak about the ZBA because we're not the ZBA, but the planning commission says, you know, we don't really care if you triple the size of your LED screen because we think it's totally fine. And another, you know, applicant comes in, they want to double it. You know, we couldn't just say that, you know, we have an issue with you doubling the sign unless there's something specifically different about the sign, you know.
Well, the issue with area variances, one of the questions, one of the balancing equations of an area variance is the character or the characteristics of the neighborhood. So if you area variance 5 signs in, or whatever, I hate to keep going back. So let's say you area variance 5 buildings that are 1 story taller than the existing streetscape. Well, now all of a sudden you have a streetscape that is got a bunch of additional story buildings. So it becomes increasingly difficult to say what is in character and what is not if you expand, because pretty soon the thing that was originally a variance now becomes not the exception. It becomes just what's there. So you can kind of slippery slope area variances in because you can increasingly change the characteristics of the neighborhood or the location to where what was it a variance is now the norm. So that's why area variances are tricky because they have a much lower threshold to be approved by the ZBA, but inherently they have a lot of ability to kind of nibble away at the zoning code.
So I guess it's our, you know, the question, you know, there's a lot of questions that we have to ask ourselves, particularly around the neighborhood impact, and I think that to do so without the applicant there would be challenging. But what I would like us to consider is what we would mean by impact to the neighborhood. What we would, you know, so we would, I'd like to have kind of consensus among the commission as to kind of the standards we're using to look at it. And then that way it would help us inform the, you know, statement of fact. The last thing I would want is, you know, split vote or split decision kind of, you know, on this statement of fact. There's no point submitting something that we're not all behind. So I think that, you know, that's kind of what I would want, you know, and there's also 2 things, you know, with slippery slope, you know, not just with variance applications, but generally with how the zoning code is complied with in general, that I'm a little bit worried about. It's not again, I'm not the ZBA, but I can't, you know, but I can't speak as a planning commissioner. Why have a, you know, this thing that I would say is if we just proceed this way, why have a planning commission? What's the point? Because if people just build whatever they want without going through our process, it eliminates our ability to plan effectively, but it also makes us reactive and puts us in the position of, you know, treating fairness with respect to people who follow the process versus people who do not. So that's kind of my, I mean, I hate to be a process stickler, but that's kind of my perspective.
I guess I would just ask if, do we as a commission want the applicant here or not? Because if we say we do, we're just gonna rehash this all again next month. Or do we not want the applicant here and we can just make a determination today and send it to ZBA?
I think we could go around and position and then kind of share, I don't wanna.
Because I mean, I think it would be great to Commissioner Shimano's point to ask the applicant, questions. I trust Councilmember Risberger's account of the situation though, also. So, I mean, I guess I
mean,
could go either way. I don't really know.
Yeah, I kind of, in the beginning, I felt like it would be nice if he was here. I personally like that sign because it does have a lot of local businesses. There's a therapist that's on there. There's, it's not just advertisement for, retail, you know what I mean?
It's my
It's,
business, yeah.
it's very informative. And Main Street is a main road and a lot of people that travel it. So when I said that it's not tacky, it's tasteful. I'm okay with it because I know a lot of people look on that sign. And even the other day on Facebook, somebody took a picture of it because they were, there was something on there from something that they did. Anyway, something. But anyway, so I took an extra time to look at it, and see exactly it was for some kind of donation for something. So, it has a lot of community events. There's different businesses. So, if it was tacky and it was obnoxious, then I would say I don't think so. But because it's not, and it's been there for so long, to me, Main Street has always had that there. So to me, it just should still be there. And I like the fact that the ZBA said that they look at everything individual. So I see what he's saying about a slippery slope, but at the same time, if they look at things at an individual, then I think they would take this also in consideration as individual. So, I mean, I'm okay with it. I think it, but that's only because I've been on Main Street for so long. I just can't see anything else up there. No? What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a particular issue with the sign itself, I don't think, because it has been there for so long, I'm just kind of, I don't really even ever notice it, it just kind of exists on Main Street for me. I guess the issue with it is if Councilmember Risberger's account of events is correct, I don't agree with granting it if he had done it in this way. We're basically building it and then kind of asking for forgiveness or approval after doesn't really sit right with me. So I don't agree with the way that it was done, if that's the way it was done. So it would be good to have him here to ask him that. But that's kind of a dangerous thing to just have people be able to build something and then come to us after for approval.
Thank you. So I think, if I hear everybody correctly, we're in agreement that we would like, the applicant to be present at the April meeting. But we would also, I think we would also like, Steve, if you could give us the sign, kind of any sort of information about the sign permit denial and everything like that, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us that. And I think we would also ask that the correct applications submit, refiled. I don't know if he needs to pay again for the separate application, but we just ask that the correct applications filed and then ask, I think we can waive, I guess we can't waive, but the ZBA can waive whatever requirements they would like, but we would ask that, at least the correct application be filed and that the, area variance criteria are, and how the project complies with the area variance criteria are included here. So that way we can make a robust kind of finding of fact. I think as far as, personally, I don't have an issue with kind of the design of the sign. I don't think it complies with the intent of the MU1 code. I don't think it complies with what the MU1 code's trying to achieve. I think that, that's just my, my perspective as, as a planner and chair of the planning commission. I think that the MU1 code specifically describes the types of signs it wants. It went through a robust public review process with many opportunities to comment, including, Councilman Carson. He had many opportunities to review the code, many opportunities to comment. He's an expert on signage, an expert on kind of his business model, and he had a clear understanding of both aspects. And so he had every opportunity to be aware of the requirements. He corresponded with city staff many times. But I do understand the value that it has to the community, and I understand the hardship that would occur if he were forced to, tear it down or replace it with a conforming sign. So I think, as we said, there's a clear balancing act. So I think we should just have him come back next month, discuss it in more detail, and I'll prepare, and then based on what we discuss, we'll prepare a written statement of fact based on kind of what was this, and what transpires at the April meeting, and we'll submit it to the ZBA, hopefully as far ahead of their scheduled meeting as possible, and they'll consider it as part of the record, and, I think, they would submit their decision to us in writing as well. And I'll be present at that meeting, so if they have any questions about our statement of fact, I, would be happy to answer, and I encourage, commissioners, outside of the amount of number of people that would constitute a quorum, I would encourage any of you to attend along with me, so we could, show the same respect that, Chair Tamino showed us by attending tonight's meeting.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight, and show how strong we are together.
Well,
That's great, we are neighbors after all.
and I do want to throw out there, LED so this type of signage was, I don't want to say hotly contested, but this was one of the things that when we wrote the MU1 code was a even split. So ultimately, like, we opted not to include this type of signage in the code, but it was split in opinions as far as how that particular section or that type of sign was applied. I mean, this wasn't, hard no. The planning commission did unanimously hard no that particular type of signage.
Steve, do you think that we should just, whatever what we discussed tonight, we should just submit to the ZBA and not have the applicant come next month? Is it not enough time? Because he's coming the end of, to the next ZBA meeting. He's on the schedule for the ZBA, you said? He's on?
Yeah, so you'd have 2 weeks basically between
Okay.
meetings.
No, that's what I
No,
thought.
she's saying the end of March.
He's not
No,
He's in-
he's then.
It's an April meeting, yeah.
He's in
But
April.
if it's discussed at the next meeting, there would be 1 week to draft the written decision and submit it to your board.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, it's not like a seeker review, multi-party.
Just yes or no, this is why.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's basically like
Take enough time.
we discussed it, this is what we found, here you
Yeah.
go ZBA.
I'd like to apply, or the way I would organize it is based on the area variance criteria and then the intent of the MU1 code. And then, I think that, how envision it set up is like, here's what we looked at, here's what we found, why, just brief, paragraphs, each one kind of describing it. So that way, we don't just say, we found this, we say like why, and here's what we looked at. In the event that the ZBA member says like, well, how could you possibly have determined this, for example, we would want to be able to back that up. But I don't really see like a robust detailed thing. And I think, the other issue is that, we want to do this in public setting, so that's kind of why we would have to do this in April. We can't just like correspond behind closed doors and do that. So I think, having a clear, I would just want to have a clear order of ideas and clear explanation. And then I think that having that robust discussion with the applicant present would be good. And I think this, area variance is hard because it is a balancing act. And, it's not as cut and dry as a use variance, so I know this is gonna be a tough discussion, and I appreciate, you all taking the time to kind of debate this. Does anybody have anything else to add on this subject? So the next item on the agenda is the U-zone amendments. I think, do you wanna like kind of give a quick rundown, I guess, and talk about the U-zone, and I guess Councilman Litzberger, since you've debated this in council, you can add in as well.
Debating it. Do we have the map that we can show?
There's been an updated map.
Yeah, I didn't get it done today though. I ended up in a parking meeting all afternoon.
So we,
So the only change to the major change to the map was removing the parcel from, Ferone. With the understanding that, so there's Hillside Commons, and then there's a, I thought you were mad.
No.
I thought you were slamming something down. I was like,
Quiet
"Whoa."
down out there.
So the existing map, Hillside Commons, and there's a Campus Heights apartment, or Woodridge apartment, I guess is what they call them, are adjacent to one another. Originally, the U-zone was going to take both of those parcels. It was determined that the Ferone Drive address would be maybe better fit outside of that map. So the idea would be is that the R1 section that's there would be rezoned like in the next phase, and that Woodridge apartment would be in that zoning scheme. So essentially what we're doing is the only major change from the code sections that were already provided is that you're losing one parcel out of it. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, so, just so I'm clear, so you took out the Woodridge apartments out of it. But you told us before that
So
they're similar and we could run into
We
legal
could.
issues.
So the response to that is, my intent is that following kind of what we're seeing in zoning, is that the R1 zone essentially would be upzoned to accommodate 1, 2, and 3 family homes. Because I think that that's probably the next phase of zoning, is our low density zones would be essentially upzoned, which would bring Campus Heights and that R1 zone into compliance, basically. They would become one and the same.
So, I think what I would ask is like, have all the commissioners seen the new U-zone text?
No.
So I guess we'll, send that around. I think we would move this to, I mean, I don't, I've looked at it, I think it's, well conceived, but I think I'd like to give the planning commission, the other commissioners a chance to review along with the new map. And we'll discuss it next month. And, we'd ask that I can forward it to everybody. I have it, or, Carrie, if you want to forward it to everybody. I think
I didn't forward it because I didn't know everyone's addresses.
Yeah,
or-
so I might forget because I'm oblivious sometimes, but, I think it'd be beneficial for everyone, since several commissioners aren't here, to, send it around, gather comments. Personally, I think that it's, I think that it's important to have the Transect-based code to address our ongoing housing issues. I think it, provides much more flexibility overall, and I think the ongoing challenge will be to combine some changes to the zoning code with also efforts to attract and work with developers on the private side to propose projects that don't adversely affect our existing population. It's always a balancing act between zoning and then how developers react to it in ongoing marketing efforts, and of course, it's all compounded by the housing market with institutional buyers and inflation and everything like that. So it's very difficult to kind of juggle all of them, but having a flexible zoning code rather than a traditional Euclidean code is better, in my opinion. So I think with that said, I think that having a discussion on comments next month would be good. That way we can all come prepared. And then and I'll remind the commissioners, if they watch this meeting, who aren't here, we'll say Glenn's gonna deliver, Commissioner Picardo's gonna deliver the comments on our behalf, right? Since he's not here, we'll just assign him, no. I'm just kidding.
It's
So
not gonna show up again.
it'll give us a chance, it'll just give us a chance to discuss this as a group, provide coherent feedback. I think one thing I did wanna ask, since Councilmember Risberger is here, if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of, and Steve, if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of what the council's been saying about it, so we know.
Okay, so we've been discussing the U-zone for quite a while, and it's not a cut and dry, should we do it or should we do it, because, there's certainly benefits to adding a U-zone. The trouble, where we ran into a problem was when the piece of this that would allow summer rentals in the U-zone. And in this particular case, we're talking for this size, it would have, the way it's written currently, is that it would allow up to 75% of the apartments in this complex to be used as summer rentals. And the trouble with the additional apartment building next door, we were afraid that it was, since they run on month-to-month leases after a year, that they would see how lucrative this is. And I sat here and I gave an approximation of what they earn normally in a year versus with summer rentals. And we could see them potentially forcing people out and earning more by just renting out to baseball camps over the summer and keeping the apartment empty the rest of the year. So this led to lots of different ideas, trying to fix this and adjust it to make it work. And the last meeting we were at, I finally said, because it was just bugging me a little bit, and I don't know, were you here for this meeting, the last one? Okay. What was bothering me is something didn't seem quite right, and the drive to do this became less about the U-zone, except for Stephen. Stephen, of course, was pushing for the U-zone. But there seemed to be this underlying drive to push for summer rentals. So I asked, well, where did this come from? Did Hillside come and talk to us? And the mayor said no. He said that Hillside did not come to us. Later, I find out that what really happened was the mayor went to the baseball camp and asked them about having summer rentals, if they would like that, and that they could talk with Hillside Commons about having summer rentals. And I wish that had been brought forward first, before this whole thing came to us. And so then and the mayor, to be fair, the mayor said, well, the thought was to bring more of the summer the rentals out of downtown to allow landlords to rent to families. So then my next question was, I went and found out I asked Stephen, how many variances have we gotten for summer rentals? Because if we're talking landlords, you need a variance. And we're looking at variances in R1, R2, R3, and I think it was a total of 56 permits.
Yeah.
56 permits, which in the grand scheme of things, that's 56 permits in all of downtown. That's not a lot. So I don't think it would solve, I think moving summer rentals up into Hillside Commons does not look like that's gonna solve any issue downtown of having landlords stop renting to students and start renting to families. On top of that, and I'm throwing a lot at you guys, I know, but on top of that, there's already an underlying issue coming in the next couple of years where there's a small cliff of less students renting downtown. So the issue is being forced on landlords, whether they want to or not, to make a decision between trying to rent to students or rent to families anyway. So I think this whole thing is kind of a moot point of the summer rental issue. If we want to pass the U-zone, what you are describing of cutting out that other apartment complex would work, barring any legal issues we may run into later on. So, I mean, that's fine, but I don't think, I guess my point is, I would have liked to know the underlying reason behind this to begin with, and it seems like that underlying reason is kind of moot anyway.
And I think that,
Sorry if I said too much.
oh no, that's very helpful. I guess I'll open the floor for any questions from the commissioners. I think the only thing that I would say is that, I think it's important to be mindful of the overall broader impact of, the zoning code changes and ongoing development and how that could affect, our community. I think it's relevant to be, prepared for the expansion of All-Star Village and kind of to avoid what happened with Cooperstown Dreams Park and their housing market over there. But that said, we can only do so much to control, the development pattern without, kind of running afoul of private businesses and housing in general. But I think it's well conceived to be prepared and to be mindful about how we get residential properties to have a good mix between, families, renters, short-term rentals, et cetera, and have ability, be responsive and flexible in how we approach that. I think zoning is a good tool to do that. So thank you, Stephen, for preparing the U-zone code, and I look forward to a good discussion next month. Does anybody else have anything to add about this topic? Any new business to share? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made by Vice Chair Tomaino, second. Second
Second. Either way.
by Commissioner
It's the dark
Tomaino.
hair.
I always keep thinking that she's the chair because that's how I came on.
Yeah,